All right, it's 5:30. Welcome to tonight's Planning Commission meeting. We need to open by appointing a chair since our chair and vice chair are not here tonight. Would someone care to make a motion on that?
I will make the motion to appoint you as the interim chair.
I will second that motion.
All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Okay. Could we get a roll call, please?
Commissioner Freitas,
Here.
Commissioner Lazar,
Here.
Commissioner Kraft,
Here.
Commissioner Benson, and Commissioner Meyer are both absent. Thank you.
All right, thank you. We will now do the salute to the flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. We'll move to item C, approval of minutes. Would somebody like to make a motion on that?
I would move to approve them as drafted.
I'll second that.
All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? No abstentions. Item D, oral communications. This is the opportunity for any member of the public who wants to speak on something that is not on tonight's agenda to address the commission. You will have 3 minutes. Is anybody in the chambers wanting to do that? And I can't, any hands on Zoom? All right, we will close item D and move past E to F, new public hearings, the Sunset Heights multifamily affordable housing development.
We have Assistant Planner Kirsch presenting. It says sharing is not turned on. Oh. Okay.
I've got it on.
Okay, good evening, everyone. I'm Assistant Planner Kirsch. I will be presenting the Sunset Heights multifamily affordable housing development for the property located at 1200 West Harris Street. The applicant, Rural Communities Housing Development Corporation, or RCHDC, is requesting approval for a lot line adjustment, density bonus, design review, and a surplus property. Here's a bird's eye view of the project. The project is located on the southwest side of town. Looking closer, the project's located between, oh, my clicker's not working. It is on. Is it delayed or is that you? Okay. You just have to click through it for me then, because this isn't working. So the project's located between Henderson and Harris Street and is directly upslope of Broadway and is west of Fairfield. This site is unique because it's located in both the service commercial, next slide please, is located both in the service commercial or SC district and the residential medium or R2 district as shown on the map. Therefore, the SC portion of the project was reviewed using SC standards and the R2 portion was reviewed using R2 standards. Next slide. And the project site is located on a plateau with steep bluffs along Broadway and Henderson as indicated by the squished white contour lines on this map. Next, please. Another one. Okay. Thank you. Okay. Some project history. Sometime between the 1940s and 50s, the site had a quarry on the north side, which nearby subdivisions used as fill material. The entire site was zoned multifamily housing and remained undeveloped as shown on this 1988 Sanborn map. In 1984, Ernest Pearson got approval to reclassify the southwest portion of the site to service commercial to allow for off-site advertising sign for the Eureka Mall at the foot of the bluff along Broadway. At that time, the site was divided into 3 APNs as shown on this map. 2 of the APNs were owned by Pearson, and the APN along the northern portions of the site was owned by the city. And according to city records, this land was acquired by the city at an auction in 1945. In 1999, Hank Pearson obtained approval to relocate the Pico office from the Pearson Building Center on Broadway to the service commercial portion of the site. And in 2017, Greg Pearson approached the city to redevelop the site with the Sunset Lofts, which was a 43-unit apartment complex. At the time, he applied and received approval for a lot line adjustment, merger, and street vacation to consolidate and reconfigure 17 parcels into 5 larger parcels and vacate the remaining of the undeveloped portion of Sunset Avenue. The city retained ownership of the 0.7 acres on the western portion of these resultant parcels, shown in yellow. In 2020, Greg Pearson obtained design review approval to construct the Sunset Lofts on 4 parcels under his ownership. Then in 2021, Greg Pearson decided not to construct the Sunset Lofts, but instead proposed a swap for the 4 parcels for 3 city-owned parking lots. And in 2022, City Council declared the parcels as exempt surplus land to be transferred for the development of affordable housing. Then City Council approved a Memorandum of Understanding or MOU with Pearson, and the city acquired the parcels shortly after. As part of the MOU, a lot line adjustment was processed to reconfigure 2 of the site's parcels in order to create a small parcel around the existing Eureka Mall sign. And this map shows what the current APN map looks like. City Council amended the 2019-2027 housing element to officially add the Sunset parcels to the implementation program, IMPH-34, which was certified by the California Department of Housing and Community Development and requires Sunset parcels to be developed with a minimum of 60 very low income and 20 low income dwelling units. In 2023, City Council approved a MOU with RCHDC for the development of Sunset parcels consistent with the requirement of the housing element. Also in 2023, the city and RCHDC hosted a community meeting and sent out a survey to gather input on the proposed development in its conceptual phase. And then earlier this year, the city facilitated a development review meeting with city staff, Caltrans, and RCHDC to refine the project. This was followed by RCHDC presenting a conceptual design to the City Council during a special session. These collaborations has now led us to the proposed project. The project will be split into 2 parcels, and each parcel will have 2 buildings and 44 dwelling units, with a mix of studio, 1-bedroom, 2-bedroom, and 3-bedroom apartments, and an on-site manager's unit. And of the total 88 units, 60 will be reserved for very low income, and 20 will be reserved for low income. The parcels will also include offices, indoor community centers and laundry facilities, plaza between buildings, bicycle parking, and there will be a parking lot with 42 parking spaces and one-way vehicle access from the project site flowing through the parking lot from Henderson to Harris. There will be a paved sidewalk located along the western edge of the parking lot to provide a path of travel from the buildings to the adjacent streets. There will be landscaping, which is shown here in green. There will be a 6-foot-tall perimeter fence, trash enclosures, and a large bioretention area down by the corner of Henderson and Broadway. The project will require 4 permit approvals. The first one will be a lot line adjustment. Then RCHDC proposes to use incentives and concessions allowed by the state density bonus law to deviate from city development standards. And then per Eureka Municipal Code, The proposed new buildings require design review. And lastly, the project will require City Council to declare as surplus an approximately 30,170 square foot portion of the project site that the city has not already declared as surplus property. As described in the previous slide, the applicant is proposing the lot line adjustment and merger to consolidate 4 existing parcels into 2 new parcels. The tables above show the breakdown of how the parcels are being merged. And the map below shows the 2 new parcels, parcel 1 in yellow and parcel 2 in purple, and the existing parcel lines to be deleted are shown with red dashes. Also, the portion called out above parcel 1 is owned by Pearson for the Eureka Mall sign and is not implicated by this lot line adjustment. Since the adjustment does not increase the original number of parcels, approval for the lot line adjustment can be made. Under state density bonus law, housing development projects that propose 5 or more units and include affordable housing are allowed to exceed the local jurisdiction's maximum density limits to deviate from other development standards and zoning code requirements in exchange for below market rate rents. Because the project site is located within 1/2 mile of a major transit stop, the HTA stop at Bayshore Mall, and because all proposed housing units will be deed restricted for very low and low income households, except for the manager's units, the project qualifies for unlimited density, a height increase to up to 3 additional stories or 33 feet above the maximum building height limit, and up to 5 incentives or concessions. And just for you, those that don't know, incentives and concessions are reductions or modifications to things such as zoning code and architectural requirements. RCHDC is requesting approval for a height increase to exceed 35-foot maximum building height allowed in the R2 district by up to 11 feet for the proposed 3- and 4-story buildings. And 1 incentive concession to deviate from the building entry development standard in Eureka Municipal Code 312040, which requires that on lots where ground floor units have independent entrances, as currently proposed, all ground floor dwelling units with street frontage must have individual entrances facing the street. So moving on to design review, the goal of design review is to make sure that new developments meet objective design standards, particularly for street-facing facades. This helps ensure that buildings are well articulated and visually interesting, contributing to overall character of the area. Design standards require the new buildings to incorporate at least 2 architectural features from a list of 15 features, and the facades do not have blank wall areas greater than 10 by 10 square feet. Tonight, we'll be looking at 3 street-facing facades on West Harris, West Henderson, and Broadway. The facades will incorporate 3 of the listed architectural features. The first one is balconies. The next one is roof form variation. And then they also include horizontal articulation, which I will be showing in the next couple slides. And as you can see here, the project does not have blank wall areas greater than 10 by 10 square feet. And here's the street-facing facade of Broadway. As you can see, this facade contains balconies, roof form variation, horizontal articulation, and does not contain any blank wall areas. Other design features include an arrangement of windows, variously scaled facades created by differing building heights and recessed sections, tree planting, landscaping, and the design incorporates a variety of exterior materials across different sections of the building, adding both depth and a range of textures for enhanced visual interest. And here's that floor plan, which shows horizontal articulation, where there are different parts of the buildings being recessed. As you can see, there are gaps between the balconies and projecting from the building walls. This design breaks up their massing to align better with the scale of the surrounding neighborhood. Eureka Municipal Code section for exterior materials also requires that materials allow for long-term durability and appearance and includes a number of standards to ensure high quality. The project will utilize 4 materials, including board and batten siding, which will be installed in separate pieces, cement board shingle siding, cement plaster, which will cover less than 50% of the street-facing building walls, and composition roof shingles. Lastly, we have the surplus property permit, a 30,100 square foot portion of APN 008052032, shown here in yellow, located along Broadway in Henderson, was not declared surplus for an affordable housing when the rest of the project site was declared surplus back in 2022 because it was not originally its own parcel. It was originally parcel that ended in 016. So initially, RCHDC proposed a lot line adjustment that would have reverted this portion of land back into a separate independent parcel retained by the city. However, this would have resulted in a narrow and steep parcel that would be deemed unbuildable under the Eureka Municipal Code. To address this, the area is proposed to be incorporated into 2 resulting parcels and designated as surplus property, allowing the entire project site to be transferred to RCHDC. I would like to clarify the distinct roles of City Council and Planning Commission for this. Ultimately, City Council has the authority to declare city property as surplus. The role of the Planning Commission tonight is to in this process is limited to providing a recommendation to the council, unlike the lot line adjustment, density bonus, and design review, where Planning Commission has direct decision-making authority. Based on the analysis in the staff report, the findings can be made to support the proposed Sunset Heights multifamily affordable housing development. Staff recommends the Planning Commission hold a public hearing and adopt a resolution finding the project exempt from CEQA and conditionally approving the lot line adjustment, density bonus, and design review, and recommending the City Council declare a portion of APN 008052032 as surplus property. Staff is prepared for has prepared a suggested motion, but we are going to stop screen sharing to allow for discussion. Staff and the applicant are here for questions.
All right, thank you, Assistant Planner Kirsch. Excellent presentation. I'll open it up for fellow commissioners to ask questions of staff and the applicant.
The meetings, the community meetings, are there design elements that came out of those meetings or anything that was incorporated into the project we see tonight?
I believe so, and I feel like that question may be better answered by our architect who's online. His name is Robert Hayes, and I think he might be on Zoom.
I would also just mention that one of the biggest things that came out of it was just, you know, the immediate neighbors to the east, and so there was a lot of thought into minimizing view impacts by utilizing the slope. It's up to the chair whether to ask if somebody else wants to, if you want the architect to answer or not.
I would love to have the architect address Commissioner Lazar's question.
Okay. Good evening, everybody. Let me take myself off. Okay, here I am. Thanks for having us tonight and letting us present the project to you. We've been working pretty arduously on this for quite some time. The neighborhood meeting that we had brought up didn't really bring up many issues relative to the design of the building. There were issues about how
Robert, could you speak up or speak a little closer to the mic, please?
Okay. Is that a little bit better?
Yes.
Okay. Sorry you're going to see my big nose in this, but some of the issues were what we were going to do with the alley, how that was going to be treated as part of the development. We are going to pave that, and that was something that the neighborhood wanted to be done. We presented how we were going to break the massing of the buildings down at the neighborhood meeting, and there were no real comments to that. We followed through with that in the design to sort of modulate the height of the buildings as they present themselves to the neighborhood to the east. Other things that the neighborhood brought up were how we were ingressing and egressing into the site. And again, that was related to the alley and how that was going to impact potentially the alley. Where we've located the ingress and egress is part of the alley, but there's plenty of vehicular space for emergency services, for people going into the alley and also into our project. So we've met the city standards on driveway widths and drive aisles and so forth. So we have good distances and clearances for vehicular access and emergency vehicles through the site. Those were the issues that were brought up at the meeting, and I will leave it at that for now. Thank you.
Thank you. Please.
I had one more question for the architect, if you wouldn't mind just sticking around for a second. In the report, they mentioned a concession or a waiver, I always get them confused, was requested for the street-facing entrances. And there was a note that it was considered inappropriate or infeasible for this site, but I didn't understand why. Could you explain what the thinking was there?
Certainly. The three frontages on Broadway, Henderson, and Harris. Broadway obviously is so steep that you can't, really enter the site there. So that doesn't really work. Henderson and Harris, it doesn't really, the site doesn't really lend itself to those being entrances either, because again, the slope through those spaces to the north and south faces either Henderson or Harris. The slopes are so great that again, it just doesn't lend itself well to having entrances off of those streets. Not so bad on Harris, but Henderson clearly is pretty steep and busy. So it really made the most sense to have the entrances where they're currently placed, which is off the parking lot, which is off the east side of the project.
Okay, yeah, I think I might have been confused by the elevations then, because I assumed that you would consider the alley the street-facing side, but I didn't see entrances facing east, facing the parking lot. But maybe I just misinterpreted the plans.
It is shown in the elevations. Basically what we did is we carved out, we placed these plazas on each phase of the project, and those plazas become the arrival point and the entrances, along with some other entrances to the buildings, but it's really mostly seen as those plazas as the entrances to the buildings. It's going to be pretty nice.
Okay, thank you.
I guess actually I have a follow-on question to that too. But before that, Director Kenyon.
I just wanted to mention that the street-facing building entries standard, to give some context, requires you to have an ADA path from that entrance to the street.
So this may not be an architectural question, but I'll ask you anyway. For the ongoing use and management of the alley, my initial look at this was those two streets are pretty hairy. And so how is traffic going to be managed? Is that alley going to be one-way or two-way? Are there going to be any restrictions on parking in the alley? Or otherwise blocking it? Can you address any of that stuff?
Good questions. We're going to pave the alley as part of this project. The alley is not part of this property. So managing that in the future is, sort of out of RCHDC's hands. But the ingress and egress, we're really trying to create a one directional entrance and exit. How the alley, I'm just going to say those that access the alley treat that, maybe a little bit different than what we're really pushing for our project. But off of Henderson is our entrance, and then the exit would be on to Harris. And that makes sense with how the traffic patterns on those two streets work. I don't know if that answers your question, but that's, I don't know if you have follow-up, go
Yeah,
ahead and ask it.
that makes sense. Thank you. Commissioner Freitas, Commissioner Lazar, any other questions for the architect while we've got him?
Not at this time.
Okay, thank you. Other questions for staff?
Commissioner Lazar, do you have any other ones? Because I kind of jumped in on your comment train.
I think I'll wait for after public comment. I don't think I have any questions so much.
Okay, I had one other one. What did Caltrans have to say about it? I mean, I'm assuming if some of the residents are going to use the bus stop at the mall, they're going to have to cross Caltrans and then go along, or cross the highway and go along the highway to get to the bus stop. So were there any comments raised?
I was not at the earlier development review meeting that they had with Caltrans in March, but when we did send the project referral out in October, we didn't receive any written comments from Caltrans.
We did. They responded that they had no comments. And at the meeting, they were more focused on drainage and just making sure that the drainage is handled. But they do have a multimodal, corridor plan for Broadway that involves improving the intersection of Henderson and Broadway, and adding a bike lane. And I have those plans in case you wanted to look at them.
Okay. I don't, but thank you. That's helpful.
I had one more question. Is I'll ask staff, and if you want to refer to the applicant, please do. For the non-buildable parts of the parcel, what is the plan for landscaping and ongoing management of that, and anything that would address the issues that those sites have now with illegal camping and that kind of thing?
Robert, do you want to answer that?
Sure. The intent is to landscape the areas, with appropriate planting and density of planting to property lines and so forth. And in the areas that there is current, encampments and so forth, we will be putting in, there's going to be a fairly good sized drainage structure down in the north part of the site that's going to be bioretention, taking all the drainage of the whole site. And we will be placing, types of features that will discourage, activities from happening in those areas. So that's basically, in concept, what we're doing, but we'll develop those plans further as we get into the building permit drawings and so forth.
All right, thank you. Any last questions for staff? All right, we will open this up now for public comment. Traditionally, we allow the applicant to take the first comment if they want to. That's 3 minutes each. Just come up and say your name, and you'll have your time.
Hi, Bob. I guess I'll go first. This
Okay.
is Beth. My name. Sorry. Oh, it's on. Okay, great. My name is Beth Matsumoto. I'm the Director of Multifamily Development with Rural Communities Housing Development Corporation. Thank you. That's nice. I don't have much to say. I'm just here as representative of the applicant. We appreciate your consideration, and we really appreciate staff support. The planning document that they put together is very extensive, and they put a lot of time in that. So we appreciate the city's support in this entire project. And that's pretty much all I have to say. So I'll turn it over to Bob, our architect. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for giving us a little bit of time here too. I'm going to be very brief in this because I think that Penelope did a great job of presenting the project, but I'm going to add to it in the respect that we really worked hard at siting the buildings, the mass of the buildings where they will have the least impact to the neighborhood, that being the north and the south portions of the site. In the center, we placed 1- and 2-story structures so that there would be a nice wide aperture between the higher structures, so that views and distant views can be still attained by the surrounding neighborhood and so forth. And then of course we tried to break the buildings down, with architecture styles that are reminiscent both of traditional historic sort of structures in and around Eureka, and also have some elements that are a little bit more pushing the envelope and a little bit newer building elements. So we did a nice mix of building elements around the project to create a good interesting project. And also the siting was done very purposefully to minimize the impact of the neighborhood. And thirdly, we set the buildings as far as possible away from surrounding existing structures to create a good buffer. And some of that was already said, but I just wanted to sort of underscore it a little bit. And with that, I will pass it on to the next folks.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Other folks in the room who would like to address the commission?
Hello, I'm Sierra Braggs. I'm from Redwood Coast Regional Center. We serve about 2,000 people with developmental disabilities here in Humboldt County, and we are one of the tiny funders of this project. We've been working with RCHDC for about 7 or 8 years now with some projects in Mendocino County, and I'm here to say that we fully support the current design and the project, and we're really looking forward to seeing it come to completion. We really appreciate the efforts that they go to. I know it's required that things be ADA accessible, but also we really appreciate that they take that into consideration with the project. So anything that we can do to move the project forward, because the funding that we've provided is always governed by time, and so every ability for them to move the process forward in a timely manner is greatly appreciated.
Good to know. Thank you. Anyone else in chambers? Seeing none. Anybody on Zoom? Looks like it's just us. All right. With that, I'll close the public hearing and bring it back to the commission for discussion.
Yeah, I wasn't sure where to bring this up, and I apologize if it should have been earlier, but I contacted Director Kenyon earlier this afternoon because when I looked at this project, I saw potentially it interfering with a what I'd like to see as someone who lives in this neighborhood, an opportunity that may emerge in the future, and that is some type of bridge over Highway 101. I think I've brought it up in the past. It's kind of pie in the sky. It would be reliant on a lot of other things coming into play. But because this is city-owned property, this is kind of the last step before it's conveyed off to be developed, it seemed wise to consider at least not precluding that from happening in the future. And I guess to that end, what I spoke with Kristen about was just about trying to maybe reserve an easement of some sort in strategic locations on the property should there be that opportunity in concert with Caltrans and neighboring property owners on the west side of Broadway. because I do see it as critical as having connectivity between the waterfront trail and interior portions of the city, and the highway essentially prevents that connectivity and is a difficult thing to broach. And because of the elevation grade differences, this is a natural place where you could land an overpass of some sort. So to me, it seemed most sensible. It could be on the southern portion of the site or even the northern portion of the site. Probably not in the western portions because of the building configuration. But that is something that's somewhat speculative. So I guess I just wanted to kind of put that out there as something, we're ultimately making a recommendation on the, as Planner Hirsch mentioned, on the actual land part, the disposition of the land. So it could be bundled with that recommendation, something along the lines of reserving an easement and allowing staff to figure that out as part of the handoff with the development group. But yeah, that was a concern I had, as this is potentially the last chance to maybe hold on to some possibility of that in the future. Does that make sense?
It does. And the one comment we received today via email was from the, I'm going to screw their name up, of the Center for Responsible Transportation Choices. That's close. Also, noting that corridor there is pretty tough for pedestrians and bicyclists, and urging us to do something with that. I think my own take in both cases is that's not a condition I'd like to see on the project. I do think we should exhort the city to do it, and I'll look to Director Kenyon and ask this, and if he can answer it. Is anything that we're taking an action on today, if we vote on the motion as written by staff, are we precluding the kind of easement Commissioner Lazar is referring to? Is there a way to build that in?
Yeah, no, tonight is design review, which is focused on the street facing facades and lot line adjustment and density bonus. And then I think it would be most appropriate to just bundle it with your recommendation to council on the surplus, because council does have to still act on that. And so this will ultimately still go to council. And we do plan on reserving easements where we need them. So as part of we haven't entered into a lease disposition development, a DDA yet, disposition development agreement. So we're working through that right now. So it's appropriate time to make a recommendation.
And the good news is, yeah, it wouldn't even be necessarily part of a decision that we're making. It's just augmenting a recommendation we're making on the council's decision. So even though I do feel like it's like massively speculative, I'm here for it. I'm supportive of this dream. And if Commissioner Lazar, you wanted to make a modification to the motion to encourage staff to make a certain kind of easement, I would be happy to vote for that. I am wondering, though, what that would look like. I don't know, Director Kenyon, or if Mr. Willer in the audience would have any thoughts on what kind of easement we would want to retain, like how big it would be, or what kind of easement it would be. Would it be an access easement? I'm just kind of curious to know what that would look like.
Good evening, commissioners. Yeah, it is a little bit difficult. Thank you. To answer the question on as to what an easement would look like there on this parcel, Director Kenyon brought that up to me earlier today, and I was trying to think on the fly, like, what would that look like in this case, given that you not only have to potentially land a bridge, like a pedestrian style bridge on this parcel, but then also on the other side of Broadway, and how would that look there, given the layout of the private property and the existing public rights of way that are there. So I don't have a great answer, other than I think that it would be some sort of like a a public access easement, a right of way of sorts, more or less. There would be, whatever would go on this parcel, there would have to be negotiations with Caltrans over their highway right of way, and those can be challenging. But then on the other side, it's like, where does it land? And so that's something that would definitely need some thought. You have the Bayshore Mall Way, which is generally right across from the parcel, which makes sense from a public right-of-way being accessible there. Outside of that, you'd be looking at trying to find a private property owner or a location on a private property that would work there and that could work for a landing spot. I think on the upstream end, it's a little easier to launch a bridge when you have the elevation. It's coming down on the other side where you have to some way get down that elevation, make up that elevation coming down. So you need probably a bigger footprint to land something like that. I would say it's definitely something that's been in the thoughts along the Broadway. 4th and 5th corridor are separated crossings where pedestrians and cyclists don't have to cross live traffic, so to speak, whether it's at intersections or not. So it's definitely something that has been talked about. It's a challenge in a lot of ways because of the things I was just discussing as far as like the area needed and the cost, and then also Caltrans. But it's definitely something that's on the list of things that we're continue to bring up with Caltrans, understanding that the Broadway in this case is a barrier to people safely being able to cross back and forth in the city. So is that good? Okay.
Thank you. I have smarter people on both sides of me, and I'm confident that one of them can craft a motion that will be general enough to say, let's not shut the door on such a thing. We have this dream. Any other other discussion?
Yeah, I would just say on the remainder of the project, I feel like it's a good design. I feel comfortable that there's been enough engagement with the community, and also site-specific, considerations have been incorporated into the design. So I don't have great reservation about that. The alley is a challenging situation. I visited the site today. It's from a circulation perspective not particularly ideal, especially on the Henderson side. But I think to a certain extent we just have to allow Public Works and the applicant to kind of hammer that out. And there's probably going to be some significant changes. There already has been since I've lived in this neighborhood, to the removal of two-way traffic on Henderson, change the circulation in that area. And there will probably be some more changes in the future associated with bicycle and pedestrian improvements. So I don't think we can really do much beyond trust our staff to work with them on that. So I'm prepared to make a motion if no one else has any other things to discuss.
Yeah, no, I am too. I agree with CRTP's Coalition for Responsible Transportation Priorities comments. I don't think that this project should get straddled with a bunch of improvements, and I don't think we could do that anyway. But if they're providing parking spaces for half of the tenants and expecting people to take the bus, it's not a very friendly pedestrian environment. So anything we can do to support the development of more friendly travel for residents, I'm super supportive of. So Commissioner Lazar, would you like to modify the motion?
I'll take a whack at it. Let me just see here. Okay. Okay. So the first part I can do pretty easily. I move the Planning Commission adopt resolutions finding the project exempt from CEQA, conditionally approving the lot line adjustment, density bonus, and design review, and recommending the City Council declare a portion of assessor parcel number 008052032 as surplus property for the Sunset Heights multifamily affordable housing development at 1200 West Harris Street, with the additional recommendation that in acting on the surplus property, that the council direct staff to work with the future property owner to establish an easement in areas of the property that could potentially be used for a bridge associated with pedestrian and bicycle improvements across Highway 101 in the future.
Commissioner Freitas, do you like that enough to second it?
Yeah.
All right, we have a motion and second. Do we have additional conversation? I'll just say I thought, it is a dense project on the parts that are being built. I think it's cleverly designed, given that we need this kind of thing. So I'm happy to vote for it too. Let's do a roll call vote, please.
Commissioner Freitas?
Aye.
Commissioner Lazar?
Yes.
Commissioner Kraft?
Aye.
Thank you. Motion carries.
All right, thank you. We don't look like we have any old business or new business. Before we get to item I, staff reports and communications, I would like to make a motion and take a quick vote to swap items I and J and allow Ken Bates and Hildebrand to present to the commission on some stuff having to do with the waterfront and not have to sit through the rest of our meeting.
You can just do that as chair.
Oh, I'm drunk with power. All right. Ken Bates, come on up. And while Ken's coming up, I'll say I've known him for a while, going back to my days at the Small Business Development Center. We have a project we work on together now, and if there are other people who know the history of the Eureka Waterfront better than Ken does, I think you can count them on one hand and have your thumb left over. So I'm looking forward to this.
Well, commissioners and staff, thank you for your time this evening. What I'm hoping to do is to just go through some fairly recent history of the Eureka Waterfront. This is a presentation, a shortened presentation that I initially made in Sacramento in 2017 at the American Planners Association convention, when I got to be a guest speaker there, talking about waterfront development and things. A little closer, okay, yeah. So a couple things. So I'm a third generation California commercial fisherman. I grew up in San Pedro, and about in 1965, I subscribed to a monthly publication that the federal government put out called the Yellow Sheet. And the Yellow Sheet was the landings, all the landings of fish that got on the entire West Coast, everything from Bellingham, Washington to San Diego. And consistently in the Yellow Sheet, Eureka was at the top of the list year after year after year. So and during those years, Eureka was the largest fishing port on the West Coast. This was it right here. When I came here in 1970, at that time, there were 8 fish buyers. 5 of them were also processors. We had the largest cold storage in Northern California, anything north of San Francisco. 3 fuel facilities, 4 boat yards, 3 fishing gear stores, marine electronics business, machine shops, hydraulic shops, welders, and marine fabricators. The fishing fleet that was here at the time basically took the entire inner reach. And the inner reach for fishermen started at the foot of Washington Street at B-Dock. There was three buyers there, and continued clear around through the area that everybody knows as the Eureka Waterfront that we all walk on, and around the corner to Froman's. Now, Froman's was where the Froman family had a haul-out facility and a bunch of boats where the Target building is right now. So there was a lot of boats here. There was about 350 to 400 boats that were in this harbor in the time in 1970. And in the summer, the spring and the summer, that would peak to 700 to 800 boats. There would be boats when the wind blew, there'd be boats 5 and 6 deep on the Eureka Waterfront. The thing that was interesting about that is that this was the most vibrant fishing community that I'd ever seen. And that's including me growing up in San Pedro, which had a big purse seine fleet and all that stuff where I grew up. So something changed to make all that go away. And it did go away. What we see right now is we're down to 2 fish buyers. The processing company that we've had here that's in the EDA building is shortened up. They're no longer processing. We've got 1 fuel dock two boatyards. There's one new marine store. The other two are gone. And if we just kind of just look at things generally, the waterfront right now, for my baseline, is essentially is void. For someone that just came to the community, they go, oh, look, there's all this stuff going on. Well, so what I'd like to do is talk to you about some of the things that I learned from a guy named Arnie Herskovic. And Arnie Herskovic started out as a city planner years and years ago here. And eventually Arnie went ahead and he became a private consultant. And as my job as a board of directors in Humboldt Fishermen's Marketing Association, we hired Arnie to help us through 3 different general plan updates, over the time. And where our concern was waterfront zoning and planning. So here we go. As it turns out, in about 1966, 67, somewhere in that particular vicinity, the City Council of Eureka and the staff at the time was looking at the waterfront, and they were trying to figure out how to improve it. And according to Arnie Herskovic, they hired a consultant firm to come from San Francisco. That firm came up here. They looked at all the fish plants that were existing here. They looked at the fact that but half of the fleet of the boats tied up against the waterfront right there. And they looked at the other alternative properties that were available and stuff. And they basically made a report that went to the city council that said, you could do better. And the way that you could do better would be by acquiring as much property on the waterfront as you could, the city that we're speaking of, and proceed to switch over to visitor serving, tourists, restaurants, shops, shopping things like that, hotels on the waterfront. And that would basically, they thought that would increase the revenue. As it turns out, what happened there was that when the city went to look at the tidelands areas, the tidelands on the Eureka Inner Reach were almost all privately owned. And when the city decided to go back and sue the tidelands owners to recapture those properties, which they did, and they were successful, all except for one particular piece of tidelands that was owned by Southern Pacific. When they sued the tidelands owners, what they found was that the meander line, which is the line between mean high water and the rest of the terrestrial area that we just know as the land-based areas, the meander lines went right through most of the buildings. Davenport Marine, at the time that this was going on, had just poured a new foundation to double the size of their marine store. The fish companies and stuff found themselves that a third of their buildings were built over the water were, on the west side of the meander line, and they no longer owned the property underneath it. The fish companies immediately quit repairing things. That's the first thing that happened. They just stopped, and there was big fights with the city over who owned the docks, who was going to make the repairs to the buildings that there were now, on other property, things like that. So that was just the general trend. The city continued, as this has been going, the city continued to buy properties, and it's taken years and years and years. It's not necessarily a bad thing that the city owns the waterfront. In the Port of Los Angeles, the Port District owns all the waterfront, and it's managed with the wide view, But here in Eureka, what happened is we saw parcel after parcel after parcel go into city ownership. And all of those parcels that the city had and some of the adjacent parcels have changed over time, and they're no longer, we've lost the fish processing and things like that. So what I like to do is just take a minute and just jump through some before and after pictures. These are taken from the water. They're not perfect lineups, but they'll kind of get you where we're supposed to go. So this first photograph is taken looking at the Eureka Small Boat Basin. And in the very far background, you can see a couple roof lines. That's Halibut Producers Co-op. And that was one of the processors here. You can also see that there's a handful of boats that are side tied to each other. The boat basin at this time was actually full of boats, those kind of things. These are offshore tuna boats that were in here to deliver to the cold storage, that kind of stuff. So let's look at the second slide. Thank you. So here's the next slide. We're looking at the same area. Halibut Producers Co-op is gone. The city bought the property and they removed that building, and the federal government gave the EDA fish plant basically a taxpayer gift to the city of Eureka. It's a beautiful facility. It's probably the most modern fish plant, anywhere in California. We still have it as a city asset. It's a great thing. The boat basin itself, while it's been maintained and dredged, has far fewer fishing boats in it. So let's go to the next one. Thank you, Kirsten. Okay, so now we're looking at the old Davenport Marine Store. To our right would have been Halbert Producers Co-op, and you can see the Signal Oil sign there. The boats are moored against there, and the building to the left, that's just a white box, that is the corner of Eureka Ice and Cold Storage, the biggest cold storage in town. Next slide, please. Here we are looking at it again. Okay, so the building, the Davenport Marine Store building, is still there. If you were to walk on the side of the building that we can see, you would see the concrete cast foundations for the improvements and stuff. Those are still there. The dock's gone, the fuel dock's gone, and the ice plant's gone. Next slide, please. Okay, this is just another look. This is the ice plant dock. This is where all the boats in Northern California got flake ice. They could store about 70 or 80 tons of flake ice in that plant. They had blast freezes there for blast freezing all the fish, and storage for not only fish products, but for a lot of other things that we use in our community. Next slide, please. This is the other slide. This is no cold storage. You can see the Coast Oyster docks here, but the building itself has been burned down and gone. Next slide. So now we're basically right in front of Coast Oyster Company again, and now we're looking towards C Street, and you can see the Tom Lazio Fish Company building there. There was a fuel facility there along with processing, and that particular area had a couple back buildings that were full of fishermen's gear and a restaurant. Next slide, please. So here we are, same view again, same exact view, a little bit closer. Just out of the picture on the right is the Coast Seafood Company, the Oyster Company, and now we're looking at Eureka Fishermen's Terminal. That particular building was an 18-year project by Humboldt Fishermen's Marketing Association. Jimmy Smith, Ken Bay, and myself. It was meeting after meeting after meeting. We formed a nonprofit land trust that failed. We tried to get money from the Coastal Conservancy, and eventually we were successful in hooking up with City Manager David Tyson and Dave McGinty, who had been in the planning department. His dad was a fisherman, and we managed to pull this building off. It's exactly the same footprint as the old Lazio building, so we were able to get it permitted, and we had various parts of federal and state monies to put this in. Next slide. Okay, so now we're looking at the other side. So this is the Tom Lazio Fish Company that you see that's to the right. The vessel in the foreground, this funny looking thing that's called the Mary Lou, that is an old Higgins craft that was converted from World War II into a fishing boat. Those were made to run on the beach and leave during invasions. And then there's the Booner Warehouse, and that was also a facility that fishermen had gear and equipment stored in. Next slide. And there's the same site, no warehouse, all that's gone. Now we just basically have the boardwalk. Next slide, please. Okay, further down, this is the Fisherman's Building. These buildings were from C Street to E Street. And initially there had been a co-op in there. Eventually, Hunter and Folan Fish Company was in there for some years. Hunter and Folan became Eureka Fisheries. They were in there for a long, long time. And this building was actually owned by a consortium of older fishermen. Next slide. This is a property that the city acquired and at the time, and they were going to go ahead and try to renovate the buildings. They were working with John Ash at the time to do that, and they gave up on it and tore the buildings down. And so what we have here is empty boardwalk. Now we're looking down past, this is actually between E Street and F Street. And this is some more of Fish Company warehouses. You can see the double ridge lines of the Fisherman's Building, to the right, further down, and way down there, a little bit of triangle is the Lazio Fish Company building. Next slide. Again, more empty space. So that whole block has basically been raised of any kind of water-dependent uses. Next slide. All right, so this is the edge of F Street to the left. So right where F Street comes down to the water, which is now, it's got the plaza, that kind of thing. This is the Consolidated Fish Company and Palladini Fish Company. And the Palladini Fish Company burned in the early, I believe, the early 80s. That was never rebuilt, and that property was eventually acquired by the city. Next slide. And again, this is looking at the same thing. So now we're looking at the F Street dock. The F Street dock is important because the F Street dock has always been the area for island residents to get access to the city of Eureka. So that got rebuilt. There's no fish company buildings there. We have empty boardwalk. And in the background, you see I'm sort of losing the name of this particular, yes, thank you, Bayfront building. Next slide. So this is another look at the corner of F Street, and you can see the Cogshell Launch Building in the background, which is now where Bayfront is. Next slide. And then this is just looking past Bayfront down to what's now Kaido. This was originally NorCal Seafoods. There was docks all along here. This was all moorage for fishing vessels all the way down here. And I think that's the last slide in that bunch for a second. Let's see. Yeah, and then this is another view of Kaido. You can see just past Kaido to the left, the aquatic center. That was actually K Street Dock. That also had a hoist on it, and that was a fish unloading station for a long, long time. So a couple things that are sort of interesting when we talk about this stuff, and I'm going to get my notes here. So after the city acquired all these properties, one of the things that they had to do is they had to figure out how to get rid of the fishing fleet. They had to get the fishing fleet off of the waterfront. And what ended up happening is that the Fishermen's Association worked with the city of Eureka, and they worked with the Coastal Commission. And at that time, there was this little fledgling agency called the Humboldt Bay Harbor Recreation and Conservation District. And so Humboldt Fishermen's Marketing Association was responsible for working with them to find a place to relocate the fishing fleet. And after looking at 5 different sites, some of them had huge environmental damage or other problems, Woodley Island was picked as the site. The Woodley Island Marina is the very first marina ever built to relocate an entire commercial fishing fleet. So the reason now, if you step up to the docks, on the Eureka side today, and you don't see any fishing boats, is because they were moved off the waterfront. A couple slides. The next slide, I'd like to show you 2 slides here, and this gets into the thing that I love the best, which is zoning. And I know this sounds crazy, but I have been a zoning advocate since I first came in front of the Planning Commission and the City Council in 82. I've had to learn about zoning, and I think that zoning is a community benefit in that we're able to collectively decide what to do in certain areas. The things that you just talked about, how can we best allow someone to get across 101 without getting run over? All those kind of things are super important to us. Otherwise, we would have bedlam in this community. So this is a picture of the Schmidbauer sawmill. And it takes up about a city block. And that particular sawmill, it's the way that the property is zoned. They are not required, to have a Dairy Queen restaurant in the sawmill. Okay, we've gone ahead and we have protective zoning for what the Schmidbauer family has done here. Next slide, please. Cool. So this is St. Joseph's Hospital. This is another city block that's protectively zoned. I can't put my car crushing business next to St. Joseph Hospital for good reason. And we all agree as a community not to do those things. So one of the things that fishermen see when we look at the waterfront that's left, which is basically from C Street to Commercial Street, it's a small little scrap compared to, for older fishermen like myself, what we saw when we got here, is we see that the zoning that for the fishing industrial district, the zoning appears to have some differences compared to the hospital. and compared to Smith-Bauer lumber. And I'd like to show you a couple of those. Next slide. So, and this is not a bad thing or a good thing. This is just me pointing some stuff out. So we are looking at right now, we are looking at the old Coast Guard offices that were for a while Humboldt Fishermen's Marketing Association office. The city, we are grateful to the city for them relocating Humboldt Fishermen's Marketing Association to the other side of Commercial Street in the EDA fish plant. So there's no arguments there. But what's interesting is the city in this area that's the water-dependent industrial district for fishermen, have chosen to put in basically, a non-conforming use. Now, we understand that the Vista Del Mar restaurant, which has been there for forever, is a non-conforming use and it's grandfathered in. But this was a decision on the parts of the city planners and the city council to do this. Next slide, please. So this is a little green strip that's right there at the corner of Waterfront and C Street. And at the time, during the last general plan update, the Fishermen's Association had advocated that the entire area from Commercial Street to C Street would inclusively be in the Fishermen's Industrial District and be water-dependent industrial zoning. And it wasn't until just recently that at a meeting, another meeting that I was at, that I found out that this particular little parcel is waterfront commercial. And the problem with waterfront commercial zoning is that, as you know, waterfront commercial is a broad zone. I can have my fish plant in waterfront commercial, but my neighbor's restaurant can be next to me, and if I'm running equipment at night or have airborne smells or lights, all those different things, they have the ability to curtail what the fish plant does because of the zoning that we've collectively decided that is the best for our area. So this little piece of property right here, potentially has the ability, to eventually impact what's going on in the fisherman's terminal. Next slide, please. So this is a picture looking at the center of C Street, and you're now looking at the Fisherman's Terminal building, and what you see is Jack's Restaurant, Jack's Seafood Restaurant. And I was directly involved in the design and all the grant applications with EDA and the various other agencies to try to get this project built. And during that time that we were doing that, the Economic Development Administration asked that we go ahead and do something more than just have fish processing and unloading. They were looking at job creation, not just job retention. So we had proposed in the grant that we would put a fish market that was ancillary to the processing taking place in the building at that site on that corner. And in the process of getting this building built, it got built. It sat for a long time. That particular part was empty. The city was unable to negotiate a deal for a fish market and put a restaurant in. Okay, we understand that. The restaurant, because the fish market space wasn't big enough for a restaurant, the restaurant actually pushed into the rest of the building into the processing area, a non-conforming use. Next slide. Okay, now we're on the dock and we're looking at the corner of Jack's Restaurant. And what you see here is you see a windscreen, you see some chairs, some tables, and a gate. This is built, the restaurant has moved out onto the dock. It is actually on the Coastal Conservancy public access path, and the restaurant's taken that up. The thing that also happened during this time was that there had been an emergency vehicle access right there at the corner of the building, and it basically that you could swing a big gate open that was unlocked so you could get an ambulance or something like that down in there. That all got blocked off. And the last thing is that we see that the restaurant and stuff like that is the fish buyer who's actually using the dock, has a verbal agreement with the restaurant not to block the restaurant's view. So my goal here today is not to change any of this stuff, but to get us to think as a community, to Do you want to have a fishing fleet here? Do you want to have these kind of things happen? And if so, how can we collectively work together to protect these areas, and still go forward? My concern today, and again, this is not an action item at all, but is just to think about the fact that at present, there appears to be language in the coastal program that allows for non-conforming interim use in the fishing industrial district. And my question for all of us in the community is, what does that mean? Does that mean it's going to be, a homeless facility that's tents that are set up temporarily, or is it a 3-story hotel? And so these are questions that we all collectively have to look at, to understand better kind of where we're going. Again, I know that eventually this group is going to look again at the coastal program as it comes forward for approval. It's been since 2013 that Humboldt Fishermen's Marketing Association first engaged with the city and the planning departments to change some of the stuff in the plans. So I appreciate the opportunity to show you what we've seen change. Again, this is just informational only. I greatly appreciate the work that comes out of this particular body. We would have nothing if it wasn't for the work that the Planning Commission has done to date. Thank you.
Thank you, Ken.
Yeah.
Hang tight for just a second. I'm
Yeah.
assuming we can ask you questions.
Yeah.
Do either commissioner have? Ken, I just have one, and it's only tangentially related.
Yeah.
But with the movement at Coast Seafood now, Pacific Seafood, what's the ice situation in Eureka now?
Ice is an issue in all of California in every port. Pacific Seafood Group ran the ice machine in Crescent City. They shut it down and left. So there's no ice in Crescent City. The ice machine that's here was funded by the city of Eureka. When Eureka Ice and Cold Storage closed, the city council stepped up to the plate and managed to find funding to put in the ice machine for flake ice for boats. And they had an agreement with Pacific Seafoods that said Pacific Seafoods will continue to supply ice to the boats as required. So you can still buy ice. They've raised the price to $350 a ton, which is almost $200 a ton more than anywhere else. And so part of that is it's a business decision. I can't say if it's a good decision or a bad decision, but it was a business decision on their part to raise the ice price. They're not buying fish here right now. They are doing some of their own oyster processing in that building, and I would caution the city, at large, that's a huge asset. The particular building. At one point, there was talk about selling that building for $2 or $3 million, and I had to point out that Fisherman's Terminal, just the building and the dock, was $8 million 25 years ago. So we would hope that the city would look at this as an asset. Eventually, we don't know what's going to happen with fish processing at that site, if it will resume or not, if that company's going to resume. But again, if that goes away, then there's not going to be the opportunity to ever have, any kind of fleet involvement at a very high level. Long answer, sorry.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Well, thanks again. Okay. Yeah.
I assume when you're talking about interim uses, you're talking about forthcoming policy that might be embedded in planning documents?
It's my understanding, and Director Kenyon can maybe shed some light, but I do believe that the last planner that was here had some language in there that would allow for interim non-water dependent uses in the fishing industrial district, and I find that terrifying, actually. Yeah, because we don't describe what interim is. And we don't describe what non-conforming is. And so what happens with those kind of things is that, how to say this? The general public is stuck, because we don't have descriptions of those things, the general public is stuck trying to keep track of all the changes that are going on in the city and proposed proposals and things to not miss something that might come up in that area. Whereas if we know that right now, like the hospital and like the Smidbauer Mill, there's the fishing industrial district, doesn't allow for non-conforming uses. We can grandfather one of the ones that are here today, but make it, but to put the fence in so that we know that we've at least got that much property left to try to operate in. I don't know if that's the correct answer for you or not.
Yeah, I wasn't sure what you were driving at, and I guess
Yeah.
I would say certainly I hope you continue to participate as the plans develop, and the plan for the interim uses at the county level included some backstops as far as the maximum lease terms.
Right.
The Coastal Commission insisted on that. There was a 10-year maximum on leases, and then priority uses were, or things that wouldn't preclude the infrastructure from being reactivated for other priority uses. So I think those are the types of policy choices that would be important when considering that kind of and I would just point to with the moving of England to its new facility, right? That opened up a lot of space in that building that we were just referencing. But I'd hate to see that building languish for lack of a tenant, and I'd rather see it be occupied by something that's maybe not a fishing tenant if it means that it's preserving its integrity for the next generation of fishing related use. I mean, those are the types of things where I see interim uses, but maybe things to consider as this moves forward.
Yeah. Well, Commissioner, your point's a good one. So we took this, the Humboldt Fishermen's Marketing Association, at the time I was on the board, we took the same opinion, with the same vision when it came to installing a restaurant, a non-conforming restaurant, just to have a tenant in that end of the building. So we understand those things. One of the other things that you see, is that, I'm going to give you one example. The city of Juneau, Alaska, started looking into realizing that they didn't have adequate cold storage for most of their fish businesses there, and so they went ahead and they hired Northern Economics to come in and to do a pretty massive study on how they might improve cold storage. And they got the report, and they had the market survey, the whole thing, and they set it aside for 10 years. And 10 years later, they drug it out of the drawer and they came back and they said, well, guys, maybe we got to do this. And they went back to all the people that were going to use cold storage, and they're all gone. And fishermen are like that. Fishermen are, will stay and stay and stay until they can't tolerate it, and they go. And that's why you can go to Newport, Oregon. Newport, Oregon looks like Eureka when I moved here. So thank you very much.
All right, thank you.
Yeah.
I know you've been waiting a couple of months to give this. We appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you very much.
All right, we'll move to staff report and communications and vacation rental update. Director Kenyon.
So Planning Commission requested an update on vacation rental compliance. So I wrote a memo about it and then our meeting got canceled in October, and then we were too busy in November. I tried my best to update the memo, but I didn't have time to really thoroughly look at stuff. So I might have been a little bit incorrect with one or two numbers, but I did my best. So just to put some context into it, this is an old slide. It's not been updated with 2024, but this is showing how many vacation rental permits we issued by year, but that doesn't mean all these are still active. Many permits that we have approved have since expired because they haven't kept up their business license, which is a requirement. You have to annually renew your business license or your vacation rental permit expires. So we started regulating vacation rentals in 2017. We already had a bunch that were operating. The regulations, when we put them in place, said something about them coming in for permits, but then looking back, I see that some of them applied and we didn't actually process it. So I don't know if we ended up not following that rule or what happened, but it took a lot to compile just who's permitted and has an active business license now, and then figuring out who had expired. And now that we have that universe established, we can start doing a better job of letting people know that they're expired. But also, I think if we make the vacation rental permit also an annual renewal and put it on people to come in and renew every year, then we won't have to work so hard to keep track of it. First, we started with vacation dwelling units, which was a whole unit separate from lodging or bed and breakfast. Then we went to residential lodging regulations, where we distinguished between a full unit, a single room, and multi-room. And then we settled on vacation rental proprietor versus no proprietor on site. And so like every short-term rental in a residential zoning district is called a vacation rental, and every rental in other districts is treated not as a vacation rental, but separately as commercial lodging. And the vacation rentals in the residential districts are they're distinguished as to whether you have a property owner on site or not on whether it's a full unit or partial unit rental. So you could have a 13-unit complex, and and one of the units is the owner, the proprietor, then you can rent out all the other ones and you're treated as a proprietor on site, and you don't have to go through the use permit process. Right now, based on a lot of effort, I think we have 89 legal short-term rentals in the city. They either have an active business license, so I have that list, or some of them have been permitted under property management companies, and the property management company has the business license. So, and they're paying the TOT, so I have to figure out what are the properties that the property management company has under them and they're permitted to. And then they also have to have a permit or be grandfathered. And I've treated ones that we've been accepting their business license renewals since they started as grandfathered. Then, even though this looks like a lot of short-term rentals, it's important to note that a lot of them are just renting rooms. I do not know the number that are room, full. It's something that I could figure out because we can look at all of them on Airbnb. It's a little tricky though, because some of them say they're renting a full unit, but they've just created a new unit that didn't exist before because their house has a door to the outside and they're letting vacation rental people use that as their entrance, and they have a suite, and they've added a little kitchenette. And so it's actually really just they're renting a portion of their house, but they've made it into an independent unit, which gets problematic because our code says that you can't rent a new ADU short term. So they come in to get permitted and we're like, no, you can't get permitted because you've created an ADU. New ADUs can't be short-term rentals. So to become legal, business license, building inspection, and you're supposed to remit TOT to the city for every rental stay. You potentially also need permits, additional permits depending on where you're at. And it's different depending on the zoning district, or whether you're in the coastal zone or inland. Whether you're running the rental business from your home in Eureka, you might need a home occupation permit. And it requires work between planning, building, and finance. We're all involved in the process. And it used to be when we had paper permits that people just filled out one permit and they got their, for a vacation rental, and they got their vacation, they could apply for their vacation rental permit and their minor use permit and their business license and their building inspection, all with just one short permit application. But now that we've gone into OpenGov, we don't know how to do that anymore. And so they're having to do 4 different permits. which is something that is not customer service friendly in OpenGov, and we need to figure out a way to combine all the permits again so that they're not repeatedly having to fill out the same information. So the compliance drive was and continues to be a lot of time and effort. Like I said, it took a lot to figure out who's legally authorized to begin with. Then we created this letter template to send to unpermitted rentals about how they're not remitting their TOT and they need to. And we had to differ it because we talk about permitting in it too. And so because it's different permitting depending on the situation, we had to write multiple letters. Then we had to send the letters to the unpermitted rentals, and that involved using host compliance as the service we pay for, who tracks all the rentals in the city by looking at all those online platforms to generate this long list, and then sorting through it to identify which ones are unpermitted, obtaining the property owner's addresses, and then host compliance has a way to help us estimate the amount of TOT that they need to remit based on how much their schedule is blocked out, and so when we send the letter, we send all this evidence of all of these stays that we believe they've had to demonstrate that, hey, you know, we're serious. We know you've been operating. You need to remit your TOT. And then sending out the letters, and we did this in 6 batches, 80 letters total. So some people responded and remitted their back taxes, but then out of that, only 11 of them then applied for a permit or license. A lot of them stopped operating, so they wouldn't need to apply for a permit or license. But some of them are still operating and they're all paying TOT, but they haven't gotten their permits yet. And so that's where we come in, and planning has to send letters to those people to say, like, hey, you're good with finance now. You're paying your TOT, but you still aren't fully permitted. So we've sent 9 of those so far, and I think we got 5 responses and 4 non-responses. So now we have to work with code enforcement on that situation. So that's roping in a 4th city division to help us with this. And then some people didn't respond to finance at all. So finance and the city attorney worked on a second, scarier, please remit your TOT letter. That's been sent to 31 people. And some of those people have responded. And the next step now will be for the city attorney and finance to go to city council to get an approval to record an assessment against people that haven't responded. So out of this whole process, there's 7 new legal permitted vacation rentals. And condition compliance continues because you have to renew your business license annually. So people that are, in compliance one year can come out of compliance next year. Permitted rentals can start failing to pay their TOT, so we have to keep tracking that. And then new unpermitted operators get identified by host compliance all the time, and we all have to send them letters. So this is going to be something we continually have to deal with. And I don't know if these numbers are up to date. I apologize, but it's about 163 legal and illegal in the city properties with vacation rentals. And there's 12,000 something housing units according to the census. So it's less than 1.5% of our housing units being taken up by vacation rentals, both legal and illegal. And based on the fact that about 25% of the ones I've looked at are room shares, I'm thinking it's more like 0.5% that are taking up an entire dwelling unit. I already talked about this issue of people creating new units. Okay, so ideas for regulatory updates. I think what I've heard from council and planning commission is that the biggest concern is taking up our housing stock with short-term rentals when we desperately need it for long-term housing. And so if that is our concern, I don't think the proprietor, no proprietor is the best framework. I think instead we should focus on full unit versus home share. That way, if you have 10 full units on your property and you're on site with them, you don't get a pass because, those are full unit rentals. You're taking up a whole housing unit. Another thing is the future cap set by council. Right now, how it's written into the code is that cap would be on just no proprietor on site vacation rentals. So I propose changing that to that cap being on just full unit rentals. And also I was thinking, I noticed Arcata exempts historic homes from their cap. And I thought, we need more ways to incentivize people to be on the local register and buy and maintain historic homes. People call and they want to avoid homes on the register, but if that meant that you could have a vacation rental, maybe we'll get the opposite call in the future where people are looking for homes on the register. And then I also thought, I've noticed in other regs, barring people who are violators from getting on the list. If there's a waiting list, if we have a cap. I liked that idea. I think we all agree we don't like the minor use permit part of it because use permits run with the land, whereas this is really an annual permit thing. So we propose removing that. And then right now the vacation rental permit is tied to the property, but we're thinking, making it instead tied to the property owner so that it's not transferable between property owners. That way you're not to a taxi medallion situation where just a property has that benefit and you can advertise it for sale to future owners as having a vacation rental on it. It's especially because when they come to you, you're usually worried about how they're going to behave, and it feels like has to do more with a responsible property owner, and we have to know who their emergency contact is. So, and then, like I mentioned, requiring them to come in every year to renew their permit or they lose it. And then also we were thinking about a use it or lose it. If we're going to have a cap and a finite number of these, they should be not just holding it to keep it from other people and to have it, but to actually be using it and remitting TOT. So having a minimum amount of TOT they have to remit if they get the benefit of having a vacation rental permit. And those were the main ideas.
Well, thank you for that, Director Kenyon. Commissioner Lazar and I waded into this pretty deep and working with you and I assume by extension many of your staff. I feel like we've been heard. I do have two curiosity questions or educate me questions. What's the thinking behind no property management companies, and was there any science to the $500 TOT number?
No, there was no science to that number. I need help with that number.
Okay.
That's just a placeholder. No property management company, I'm wavering on that. I just need a better way of tracking them. But if because right now I'm tracking who's legally authorized by their business license number, and because if you're under a property management company, you don't have a distinct business license, it becomes hard for me to track. But I'm thinking if it's a yearly vacation rental, annual renewal, we can track based on the VR number, and it can be distinct to the property. And so then then I don't think I have that issue anymore, and we can let property management companies apply. As long as it's like they could apply and run it, but it's still, if the property ownership changes, it goes away.
Okay.
And we could figure that out because when they come in for their annual renewal, we can check the property ownership, that the property ownership hasn't changed, or ask them to confirm that.
Makes sense. Commissioner Freitas, any thoughts or questions?
I am curious. I think I read in the report that these might be incorporated into the next annual zoning code update. So are you looking for, like, should we dig into this now? Is this mostly just a report and we'll come back to this at a future meeting? If, like, how
I'm definitely interested in your feedback, because ideally I can also incorporate this framework into the coastal zoning code, which we're actively working on too. And our hope is to get the coastal zoning code update to you before we get the next annual inland code update.
That's exciting. Yeah. Well, I think this all looks great, and I really appreciate that. You know, I feel like we were promised that, like, it wasn't time yet when we were all chomping at the bit, but that it would come forward at an appropriate time, and now it has, and it hasn't been that long, so I appreciate that. I think the only thing I would like to have a discussion about is the physical separation. That's listed at the bottom of that report, other potential additional regulations to address planning commission concerns. I feel like when we had, like, our big drama vacation rental that kicked off this whole update, that was based on a concentration of permits on a cul-de-sac. And I, at the time, was very hesitant to deny something that the applicant would have had no knowledge of at the outset. But I do think that if there had been some guardrails to discourage that type of concentration and that type of physical development, I would have happily denied it. Because it did seem like it was having a very significant impact on that little pocket of a neighborhood. So I think it would be maybe worth having a bit more discussion, and ideally I'd like to wait until the other commissioners are present just to think about if there is a way. It was such a niche case, maybe there's not a need to go down that road. But if it did happen again, I would be happier if there was something on the books that we could point to. So I was a little long-winded, but I just wanted to raise that for the commissioners and see what their thoughts were on that. Otherwise, I'm more than happy with these changes.
I think that is a great callback. Commissioner Benson and I both pitched a fit that night, and you don't want to get into the place that, bad cases make bad precedent, make bad law. But there is something about, from my neighborhood, I can see 4 of these, and I don't like my kid riding their tricycle past the party house on Saturday morning. So, I agree. Something for the future as this comes forward. Commissioner Lazar?
Yeah, I guess on the concentration thing, I think it is a tough one to tackle, but I do agree that it's something that would empower us or our successors when we're struggling in those situations, and maybe the threshold needs to be not the percentage when you look at the totality of housing stock, but really breaking the city into sensible chunks where we can start to say, permitted or unpermitted, if there's a concentration, we're going to view that area against, and once you hit a certain tipping point, 5% of the housing stock on a certain city block or something like that, then the commission has the prerogative to deny a request if there's neighborhood controversy or something. It wouldn't be an absolute, but it would, set the findings up for us to read the room and the situation, maybe, you know, because I think that's what we were struggling with. It was like, why would we pull this project out? There's no specific finding that we can't make beyond.
Right. And in the county, I feel like there's distinct communities like Shelter Cove where you can say, okay, this is a distinct geographic area. We are working on a neighborhood naming process where we will have boundaries to neighborhoods, but we don't really have the city neatly divided into, other than wards, you know, we don't have, that's why if we did add a standard, I was thinking it might be something more like the one I suggested versus caps per neighborhood or percentages per neighborhood, just because we don't have our neighborhoods boundaries established.
Would you mind bringing up that map of the permitted units again?
Sure.
Just so we could look at the concentration. Because one thing I noticed in looking at it is that there was a cluster, I think kind of downtown. There were a couple on close to Woodley Island and a couple right in the downtown area. And like, to me, I have no problem with that. I think I would, if we were to go the route of a physical separation standard, I think it would maybe make sense, you know, away from the waterfront in more like single family residential zones. We could do it by zone or instead of by neighborhood, maybe.
So basically most of the coastal zone is commercial, so it wouldn't even fall under these regulations. It's going to be treated as commercial lodging. That's another thing that we could consider is instead of going by district, we could regulate by occupancy type and say, like, if you're converting a residential occupancy, regardless of district, into a short-term rental, that's treated under our vacation rental regulations. Otherwise, what we're dealing with right now is just our residential districts, which is essentially, like, I know we're looking at 89 short-term rentals, but the regulations are only implicating the ones inland that are in the residential districts. I could see a concentration potentially happening around the zoo, you know?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I liked Commissioner Lazar's idea maybe of like a threshold. And I wouldn't necessarily even want it to be like a hard and fast prohibition, but something where it's like, if, you know, X condition is met, then Y considerations, you know, may be entertained by the commission, additional considerations. And if it was like, if there were already let's say two, if there were already two full unit vacation rentals within 250 feet of one another, and they were going to add a third within 250 feet or something like that, you know, it said that might be a way to say we're not completely against a concentration. We just want to make sure it's not an over concentration. And for me, I think part of it too was the specific case of that cul-de-sac. So if it was 3 on a street, you know, just like a typical street instead of a cul-de-sac, I think I would maybe feel differently about it. So anyway, those are just some of my initial thoughts on that. And I don't have the answers right now. I don't have a suggestion for what to change, but it's something I would like to be able to tinker with before we see it for adoption or for recommendation.
And if it's gonna be a case by case basis, we'd have to change how we have it organized, because we're taking out the discretionary part of this and we're making it just based on objective standards. So if you wanted it to come to the commission and be considered, we'd need to change this so that the vacation rental permit is a discretionary permit, not just something that you get if the cap, you know, if you're under the cap and you meet the objective standards, which is how it's written currently.
Wouldn't it be so convenient if we could have different findings for the appeal to the Planning Commission? I know that makes no sense at all, but that would be nice. But okay, yeah, I hear what you're saying.
I don't know if it's okay to change onto a different topic. Is that right? Yeah. So one thing I took notice of in your presentation, and I'd like to drill into a little bit more, is just the the conundrum that some of these operators that are being contacted during the compliance drive face when they go to perfect their entitlement. In particular, the issue around creating arguably an ADU or a JDU within a residence that is paradoxically not allowed to be used in that capacity as a short-term rental. So I guess in dealing with that, would you agree that like the primary scenario is somebody didn't build an addition onto their house, but they reconfigured the ingress egress and developed some accoutrements within certain living space to make it somewhat self-contained? Is that generally the scenario we deal with? Okay.
I'm sorry. They had a bedroom with a door to the outside.
So kind of closest under state law to a JDU.
Yeah.
Probably all of them are well below the threshold of whatever 800 or 600 square feet or something like that.
And so far, we've been allowing it if they haven't installed a stove, and even though it still could potentially qualify as a junior ADU, we're just saying it's part of their home if it's just a hot plate and a mini fridge, and they haven't installed like a new sink. They've just like repurposed a sink. But it's such a confusing thing to navigate.
So has anyone been kind of stymied to the point where they gave up because there's no way to keep what they have?
Oh yeah, a lot of people have been upset with us about this. I see it as like, okay, they're creating a new unit with the incentive of getting to rent it short term, and maybe it'll become a long-term unit sometime. That's one way to look at it. The other way to look at it is like ADUs get these benefits, like they don't have to pay impact fees and they don't have to connect to the street the way, a second residence would. They can hook up to the primary residence utilities and stuff like that, where it's like they should get those benefits because they are giving us long-term housing that we desperately need. So I see both sides of it.
Also on that, Miranda and I are working on verbiage that'll go into the building permit application where they click they're going to be building an ADU. They will get a pop-up that says it has to be used for permanent housing, because we have had one who it just never came across that he was going to wanted to use it as a vacation rental. So we're trying to figure out the right verbiage to notify people that if you're building an ADU, you can't use it as a vacation rental. It has to be permanent housing.
And I think maybe for benefit of Commissioner Kraft, but I think D'Lo and I already know, like under state law, we don't have any choice. If as soon as something is built and looks and smells like an ADU, it's off the table as of 2018 or 2019. That you can't. It can never be used, right?
No,
Right.
I think
What happened with this specific one is we knew it was going to be an ADU. We approved it as an ADU. He just never knew that he didn't know the state law, and nothing popped up to tell him. So he's one of the ones, the person that we found, it's one of the ones we found through host compliance because he owed TOTs, that then we were not able to approve him, and he has to use it now as permanent housing.
I noticed, I live in Arcata. I noticed 2 people on my block who just built second units and are renting them short term. And Arcata allows that if it's, and I looked back at the ADU law, and if you're going in, now it's been renumbered, but back when it was 65852.2, there was this subsection E that was like, notwithstanding everything else, you have to approve these ADUs without any extra standards that are like 800 square feet or less, blah, blah, blah. For those ones, it specifically says they cannot be rented short term. But if you're not getting permitted under that subsection E,
They don't come with the strings attached.
they don't come with that strings. And there's just language in there that says we may add a regulation
But our code does.
But our
does-
code
yeah.
chose to. But it isn't technically required by state law, and that's how Arcata doesn't have that.
Okay, well that's useful to tease out, because I think, I tend to land more on the side of any refinement or development of capacity within our residential housing stock to make it more capable of independently accommodating multiple parties under one roof is on the spectrum towards developing greater housing opportunities, even if it's for a specific set of people that are not residents initially. As I think you mentioned, like, it could become long-term housing. It could pivot. It's moving in the direction towards greater and greater, units within the city limits. And especially if these are ephemeral entitlements, it could disappear and then be only available for a long-term use if we hit a cap and somebody doesn't come back in before that. So I guess I don't lose too much sleep about. I would hate to think that people are being stymied from completing the permitting process because they're in this catch-22 for the ADU stuff. I think that would be. I certainly would be in support of not including that restriction potentially.
Just to clarify, you're talking about attached ADUs where it's within the existing residence.
Yeah, because that to me seems pretty nominal as far as the intrusiveness, and but I could see a distinction being made between detached and attached, and I don't think they're a perfect. I don't think it makes total sense to treat them as an ADU when they're really just a portion of an existing house that's been kind of made more sophisticated. It's not the same as adding an addition or putting on a detached unit and developing something that otherwise really is just another home. But yeah, I just want to say I do think the idea of incentivizing use of historical properties is a good one. Anytime we can get people looking at the value of those and investing in historical structures with benefits that we can provide is a good idea. And I do think having an easy path for people who live on site to use their homes for short-term rentals when they otherwise might not be inclined to have long-term tenants, that's a win-win as far as I'm concerned. And I guess one question I had is, I was having a conversation with someone who was a tenant who had used the rental as an ADU, and then their landlord got the notice, and then they were and I had never thought about that scenario, and I just wondered if that was a one-of-a-kind thing or whether we'd run into similar situations.
We have two of them right now.
Okay.
Where the tenant was using it they were subleasing it as a short-term rental.
Yeah.
Clever. It's clever. Well, I appreciate the staff's work on this, and I'm heartened both by that and, I think at 1.5%, given that that's roughly accurate, we're addressing this before we have a big problem. The concentration doesn't, from that 30,000 foot view, doesn't look like it clusters terribly in any places. So I'm glad that we're working ahead on this and look forward to what comes next. Anything else on this item?
Just thanks. I know it's a pain and a lot of work, but it is helpful to get the update.
I'm really glad we did it, and now we have more of a understanding of and a hold on the situation.
All right.
And thanks to the subcommittee as well for putting in the work on that.
Yeah.
Yeah, Commissioner Lazar and I were happy to do that, but as always, the staff did the majority of the work, so appreciate it. Anything for item J, other reports and communications?
No, just I guess to let you know that the Earth Center is going to a design review committee in January.
Oh, very good. Very good.
Oh, staffing updates. Go ahead. Well, I want to congratulate Caitlin Castellano we did that last time. Okay, what staffing?
Congratulations again.
Do it.
So we recently hired a new assistant planner who starts on January 6th, who's replacing Melissa Smith that left. We also have another planner that is leaving us at the end of the year, which is going to open up another position, and a planning tech that got offered a position in another part of the city. So we'll have a new team here pretty soon. So 2025.
Change is a pain, but exciting. All right. Item K, my favorite part. We are adjourned. It's the only thing that gets a gavel.